In the fall of 2015, the Discography Committee of the International Association of Sound and Audiovisual Archives, IASA, began work on a collaborative project to build an online international bibliography of discographies, IBD. The IBD includes discographies created in book, article, CD-ROM, PDF, website, and database formats, representing label, artist, and genre discographies in many languages, as well as record catalogs. Such a work will never be absolutely complete, but our goal is to include information about all current and out-of-print discographies published worldwide in print or electronic formats, including unpublished work in progress. Peter Laurence is Senior Curatorial Assistant for the Archive of World Music in the Kuhn Loeb Music Library at Harvard University. He oversees many aspects of managing its ethnic sound recording collection and also selects new commercial recordings for the archive. Since September 2015, he has served as Secretary of the Discography Committee in the International Association of Sound and Audiovisual Archives. He has worked intensively on the committee's main project, building an online bibliography of all published and unpublished work in the field of discography. Peter has an undergraduate degree in classics and received his MLS in 2011. Prior to coming to Harvard in 2006, he was a world and classical music buyer for a large Boston music and entertainment retailer. And so here's Peter.
Thanks very much, Gary, and to the New York chapter of ARSC for inviting me to come and talk about the bibliography. I'm just going to pull up the PowerPoint. Most of you probably know who IASA is, the organization, but it's the International Association of Sound and Audiovisual Archives, basically the international counterpart to ARSC, established in 1969 to promote cooperation between sound archives and to work on audio preservation issues. Members come from 70 countries, as you can see there. I first became a member of IASA in 2015 as I was presenting a paper at the Paris conference for some work that I had been doing at Harvard. And it was there at that 2015 conference that I met this fellow, Philip Shear, who, if anyone was at the recent, I think, Peter, you were at that conference. Philip had another presentation about his work in the Czech Republic. This is a little bit about what he's doing in the Czech Republic. Basically, many things that have to do with sound documents in the Czech Republic. Right now, he's working for the National Museum and building a new sound lab for them. He's worked with Gabriel Gussel on a couple of different books around discography in the Czech Republic. The first was the ESTA record label, which was published and is also available in electronic format, and a relatively new book called Recorded Sound in Czech Lands. He is the chair of the Discography Committee, and at that time in 2015, the committee had been dormant for some years, and so we got together near the end of the conference and talked about reviving the work of that committee. Here's a little bit about me, too, as well, and the work that I do at Harvard. I am secretary of the Discography Committee, and basically the two of us since September of 2015, Philip and I, have been working intensively as a pair on this project, seeing it through the initial pilot phase, getting a grant from IASA to hire 2 students, one student in the Czech Republic and one student here in the US. And we've been very busy with lots of new things to report. If any of you have actually heard anything about the bibliography, there's going to be a lot of new material that I'm presenting tonight about the work. At IASA, when we were first sort of throwing around the idea of this bibliography, we realized that one of the biggest challenges was going to be to get a lot of different groups to work on it together, and we knew that we couldn't do all the entries ourselves or an army of students really, so we actually started before doing any of the details on the bibliography. We started by just writing organizations, similar organizations in Europe. We wrote ARSC at that point to tell them about our plans. Philip started attending conferences in Europe and talking about it. But really we knew that, I think I said in the introduction about the talk today that collectors and institutions are both really passionate about their collections, but they're coming at it from 2 different points of view. And they don't always share the same goals, so we knew that we were going to have to really work on that to get people on board and in support for the project. But we knew that the resource would be valuable to all of those groups, and so that was a big motivating factor. And Philip came up with Connect, Collect, and Collaborate, our 3 C's, which ultimately became like the slogan for the committee's work as well, because the work on the bibliography was here, but again, reaching out to people was another big part of what we were doing. And from the beginning, we knew that we wanted to make it open source resource and something that wouldn't be behind any wall that someone could not access. And we had floated the idea to the IASA webmaster about hosting it there. And so our plan was just to eventually get to an actual first iteration of the database, but that didn't come until fairly recently. The other thing that we did in the beginning was sort of do a kind of literature review or look at the landscape and see what kind of work had been done in this field. Up to that point, the first thing that we found was an article from the Journal of the British Institute of Recorded Sound in July 1962. That was just an article-length bibliography, and then there was Lewis Foreman's book, which you see here, which came next, and then a couple of others. But what we really wanted to make note of was a substantial print series that Michael Gray oversaw along with Gerald Gibson, and Daniel Allen actually did the jazz 2nd volume. This was projected, as I understand, to be a much larger series that would have included a wider variety of material besides just the classical and jazz and the popular volumes that actually got published. I think there was going to be an ethnic component too, and then Dick Spotswood's book, Ethnic Music on Record, came out, which is not exactly the same thing, but at any rate, that was the late 70s, early 80s, and we were looking around and just looking at the mass of material work that had been done on the internet, in static websites, or in PDFs that were different places, or even just published material through a lot of publishers that had focused on doing discographies. And then finally, we wanted to sort of pay homage to Tim Brooks' column that he had in the ARSC Journal for many years, still has. I think at one time it used to be called Current Discography, or they're separated out. Now it's Current Bibliography and includes those, I believe. So we knew that there had been a lot of work done, but that there had been a lot of work since then that we wanted to try and capture. And so we set off trying to make a plan for the bibliography. And this is a very librarian-oriented project, and so we started off by saying, how are we going to define discography? That was also something that Michael Gray had done back in the 70s when he started that series as well. This definition that you see in red is in red because it is constantly changing. And it changed it as a result of a discussion that we had at the ARS meeting in San Antonio a couple of weeks ago, which I'll get into a little bit later when I talk about that joint meeting. But our current definition is a systematic catalog of published sound recordings focused on a given artist, record label, musical genre, or region in which one finds some degree of descriptive detail or historical content. So you see here all the different formats that have appeared, in which discographies have appeared. CD-ROMs were popular for a while in the early 90s, and then many of those moved to databases. I think Tom Lord's jazz discography was print, then it was CD-ROM, and then now is a database that you actually have to pay for. So excuse me, we definitely wanted to cover commercial recording discographies and focus on those, not unpublished recordings or archival collections, of which there are some discographies. And we pretty strongly wanted to include label catalogs as well. There was some discussion at ARS a couple of weeks ago about that, which I'll get into a little bit later in the presentation too. And that discussion basically, actually before I go into that, I'm gonna, since this is an ARS presentation, it's hard to work audio into a presentation about a bibliography, but I actually have, I've brought, I know that most all of you in the audience have seen a discography before, but I brought Brian Rust's Jazz Records, an early edition of it, and I've got that kind of passing around. And I sort of picked a favorite to play and have marked that in that volume. I want to talk about this for a couple of different reasons. Number one, because that volume illustrates the passion that record collectors have about the collecting that they do. If you look at that book, first of all, it's a famous book of jazz discography, but that particular edition I bought for $1 at a record store in Boston a couple of years ago, and it is clearly such a labor of love to the person who owned it. It's got, you know, the original volume, but all these corrections and additions pasted in. It's got tracks highlighted with a yellow highlighter. There were favorites. Fortunately, the one that I'm about to play is also highlighted. But he's also got a lot of things written in too as well. So I brought it just so that you could see a discography and an example of the kind of work that we're trying to capture. So the track is Eddie Condon and his Hot Shots, and it's called I'm Gonna Stomp Mr. Henry Lee from February 8th, 1929. I'm just gonna let it play for a little bit. And Jack Teagarden, trombone and vocals.
stomp Mr. Henry Lee. And when I stomp, I want you to let me be. And when they play that low down bass, it gets the fever in my face. I just shake like a leaf on a tree. I love to stomp, honey, when they play that swing. That's what I need more than anything. When that jazz band, they begin, acts on me like a quart of gin. I'm gonna stomp, I love to stomp Mr. Henry Lee.
Most of you hopefully have seen that book. I just wanted to point out that book has its own format, performers listed in the beginning, take numbers, matrix numbers, the title and the recording date. This was the first take of that recording session of this track. But some of the examples that I'm going to show in the next few slides show the variety of the way discographic information is presented, and even in early print sources as well. So let me switch back to presentation. But before I show that slide about the examples, I'll just take up the label catalog question, which I alluded to before. These are not the same as discographies, but as we were talking among committee members recently, they're often one of the first sources that someone will consult when they're starting to do a discography on a given artist or a label like that, and their aim is certainly commercial and to sell, but we think that they're valuable to include in this kind of resource, particularly because our hope is that we will be able to get as many of them scanned and available in full version that will be linked to the bibliography so that you can easily move to the actual content of those catalogs, just like the discographies. More about that later. Question is, do we want to make it a separate section, or do we want to integrate it with the actual discographies as well? So again, they have appeared historically in many different formats. I alluded to the CD-ROMs, but these days you see them as PDFs on websites. Sometimes you see static websites where someone's just listed a bunch of information for a given label or performer. You see a lot of rock music discographies on Wikipedia these days as well. And you see some pretty amazing databases on top of all that. And so just starting to run through the list, looking at some print examples. This is another early jazz discography, Delaunay's, early version of Delaunay. And you can see how this Bix page, how the information is organized. Is that possible to read that from where you are? It's very similar format to Brian Rust there. But then you've got this Disci Phonotypia, which I love this little discography. We have this in our library as well, and someone's digitized it and put it on the Internet Archive, but it's very simple. It's just the catalog number and the composer or the performer and the piece. And looks like it does have a matrix number there at the end too. Those are phonotypia matrix numbers. So some further examples are the famous Blues Records volume, which is coming out in a new edition, I've heard, a 5th edition, sometime in the near future. You can see how that information is listed. And then I included this discography of women composers, which has a very, very different format. And this is a discography that I have used quite a bit in a project that I've been working on Arabic 78 recordings that we have in our collections. And it's actually really hard to use in the way that it's organized, but all the information is there once you figure out how to find it. And this is a Hungarian discography, again, on the other side. And here on the left is a famous discography of early Indian recordings on the Gramophone Company, starting from 1899. Michael Kinnear is Australian, but he's worked extensively on discographies of Indian recordings, earliest Indian recordings. Another big famous discography on country music records that's published by Oxford University Press, with, again, a slightly different arrangement of the data that you see here. And now I want to show some examples of some digital formats, starting with the CD-ROMs. This is the A got cut off there, but it's ABC, Paramount, Impulse. Basically, this is just a screenshot of one page of the CD-ROM from this discography. And on the right is an example of a really great static web page that's devoted to African LP labels. And so the breadth of material that's out there is amazing, and varying degrees of depth of detail and probably accuracy too. But we're starting to capture as much of that disparate material as we can so that it'll all be searchable in one place, at least by title, to find that the resource exists. Next up, I've got a series of online databases. If you don't know about DAHR, you probably want to know about it. It's an amazing project that used to be called the EDVR, Encyclopedic Discography of Victor Recordings. UC Santa Barbara is involved in this project, and they've done amazing work with Victor recordings, and including Columbia recordings now, and probably new things in the works right now. And the other is Discogs, which I'll show a bigger version of. This is a little description of Discography of American Historical Recordings. And this is Discogs, which I'm guessing if you're record people, then you probably have come across this site as well. It's a site of user-generated data about recordings that the company is in Portland, Oregon, and is growing exponentially, and a lot of great data and useful resource for looking for information on all kinds of musical genres. People, lots of different places on their project as well, uploading records in all languages and from all parts of the world. And here are two more. This is Michael Gray's webpage called A Classical Discography. A little close-up view of it here. Again, Michael Gray is the person who did the print versions of the Bibliography of Discographies that came out in the late 70s and 80s. He was also probably the first person that we wanted to meet at ARSC in Bloomington last year, because we wanted to tell him about the work that we were doing. We hadn't actually met face-to-face, and we had some great discussions about his work and about the direction of our project as well. And on the other side, this is a project that Philip, my colleague who's working on the bibliography, was involved in a couple of years ago called the Virtual National Phonotech. I think he did a presentation on this at ARSC last year in Bloomington too. This is basically a portal of digitized versions of a lot of early Czech recordings that he had worked on, and was a great project as well. And staying with digital formats, I wanted to just mention that there are a lot of PDF, Adobe PDF format documents that are out there. I wanted to especially mention GHT, which is the Gesellschaft für Historische Tonträger in Vienna. They have a lot of great material posted on their website, especially a whole series of Lindstrom discographies. And they were one of the first groups that we reached out to. Philip went to the GHT meeting in Barcelona last spring, and met with the folks there. And so here, just as an example of the Lindstrom American Record discography that they have freely available on their website in PDF format. And the other place that you sometimes find PDFs is as an addendum to other scholarly work, that it might be an academic's page devoted to a book publication. And in this case, I've picked the example of this Lee Konitz discography from University of Michigan Press. The book was published by them. I believe it's the author's website. It's been a while since I pulled this, but I believe it's the author's website. And they actually made the PDF freely available to the public. Not the whole book, but the PDF of the discography. So we could easily go in and notate that in the bibliography, capture that information, and also because it's a web page that's available, we could link to it as well, and so make that available. And on the right, there's a discography from PDF version of a great newsletter series by the Society of Indian Record Collectors. I don't know if many of you are aware, but there's a great great interest in recordings, and an amazing group of collectors that meet on a regular basis there. There's someone named Sonny Matthews who's created a gramophone museum in South India, where he has meetings the last couple of years in January to talk about, have papers presented and talk about Indian recordings. And it's an amazing place chock full of Indian 78s. And there's a little bit of an aside, but Suresh Chandbankar is one of the people who's on our project team. He's also been a source for a lot of these articles that appeared in the Cirque journal. This is just one of many discography of Begum Akhtar that I pulled. The great thing about those is that they are fully scanned and available through a South Asia digital library that's at the University of Chicago, which I don't think people are necessarily going to run across if they're looking for 78 records, Indian records like that. So by putting this in the bibliography, we make this work known, but we also provide the links to it so people can find that material. And last but not least, in the digital realm, spreadsheets, which I think have probably been a preferred medium for gathering discography data for a long time. But there's been some really promising signs that that some of this material might actually become shareable as well. And at ARSC in Bloomington last year, we also met a number of times with Dick Spotswood and told him about the project. And he just recently, I don't know if you know about Mainspring Press, they run a great blog and were a publisher of discographies for many years, but have recently gotten out of the publishing business, print form. But on their blogs, they have these wonderful new spreadsheets that Dick Spotswood has graciously shared with the world in PDF format, but they're basically spreadsheets. And you can go to Mainspring Press's website and blog and just download these and take a look at them. this brings me back to the point of our work being really to bring people together and really share resources and have the material be open and available to everyone. And so it's like a big round of applause for Dick deciding to do this with these really, really important discographies of Columbia series, especially the E-ethnic series. The amazing amount of work that he has done on that. And it's set up now so that you can look at the spreadsheet, and if you've got any corrections or additions to make, there are some gaps in there, then you can send them to him. And this is the kind of thing that when we see it, we want to really promote in our work as well too, and bringing the work, acknowledging the work, bringing it out into the open a lot more. And so this has been a great thing to see that development as well. So that is sort of a brief snapshot of kind of how you see discographies in the landscape historically and in the present moment as well. And that brings us to the beginning of our project. We now have a page on the IASA website that's dedicated to the bibliography, has a description, basic historical overview of the work that I tried to describe here in this presentation, but then a little bit about the origins of the project and our plans to grow it. And then, most important of all, how we can, as easily as possible, make it easy for anyone to contribute to the project if they have that desire to do so. So basically at this point in the presentation, I'm going to take you through a number of steps that are involved, and up here on this page, they're involved in how we can actually draw on the help of many, many people. And in fact, already have been doing that even before we got the bibliography published, which I think is great. We had a lot of people just putting entries in. We said, yes, we're going to get it up soon. You know, we're going to have something that you can see, and you won't have to worry about duplicates. And so we're really grateful for all that work. I did a lot of them, our students did a lot of them, but a lot of people, including discographers and people at academic institutions, provided entries through our Google form, which I'm about to show you. So basically all the tools that we needed to start the project were all open source and available in the beginning. So we went to Google Forms and came up with a form that we thought, this has changed and gone through many iterations, to try and capture all the bibliographic information that we thought was important to represent these discographies in the bibliography. And so here is actually what you see on that introduction page in the first level of how you can participate. And if you click on that link, it will take you to a version of the form that exists in Google's site, but we designed the form and we are able to harness that data in a spreadsheet, and that's the spreadsheet that we use to create the database for the bibliography as well too. And I just noticed that this screenshot is very old, from our first presentation probably, and it's when we had it in 6 different languages. That's how far we wanted to go to make it accessible and to make it easy for people to provide entries from all around the world. I think it was French, German, Italian, Spanish, and Chinese. And we got a lot of feedback on that part of it. The form was kind of heavy on text and heavy on explanation, and we thought it might be better to streamline it a little bit. So we actually floated the idea of just putting it in English for a while. And so we did that. And that's how it actually appears. I'm going to pop out of the presentation again, see if I can get a web page to show you the actual form as well. The great thing about the Google form is that it has analytics that are built right into the resource. And you see that over here on the right side. so that we can take a look at any of those questions and see what kind of data we're getting across all the questions that appear in the form. And so some people had talked about maybe a wiki or some other way, but right now we're using the forum, and so far it's been going pretty well. This is what the data actually looks like in our spreadsheet that is our master for the whole bibliography, and this is what we use in order to create our database as well too. So this is growing. We're now up to a little over 500 entries. Yes, sure. Yeah, sure. So the headings correspond to the questions in the Google form. So the heading is what is the format of the discography, title, subtitle or edition, author one, year of publication, publisher, language of publication, and type of discography. And so I think now I will actually just pull out of this part and see if I can get a web page to oh, Safari, okay. Okay, so this is that page that I was describing a minute ago. And as you scroll down after the details about the project, this is where you find the Google form. And here is what it looks like in real time. As you can see now only in English. But so each one of these questions corresponds to a column heading in the ultimate spreadsheet that we use to build the database. And we've got a number of these fields, just in case anybody in the audience would ever like to enter. I'll say a little bit about the form. We have required fields, which have the red asterisk behind them. And we have a lot of fields that are there to accommodate something like journal articles. And I'll take a second to actually say that we're really trying to gather a lot of material in journals. Gray and Gibson covered a lot of journals as well, but we've heard about some journal sources that haven't been covered yet, and so that's something that we're really going to try to capture, and it's going to be part of the work of our students as well. And so that's why you have this journal title and issue. It's not a required field, because if it's a book, you're not going to need that information. But we have the availability for you to enter multiple authors, but you have to have at least one. Question came up a little while ago about what do you do about record catalogs, since you guys want to have record catalogs in your database. And so we said, okay, just put an X in the author field, because it has to have something. And so that that information we recorded in the brief description that you see for that author field. And basically, they're what you would expect. Publisher and location of publisher information, date being a required field, language required, type of discography, very important to capture that as well too, for being able to sort that information when people are searching the database. And what we really wanted to do was capture an annotation too. And so we made that a required field as well. I think that snapshot of the spreadsheet was not long enough to include the annotation field. But if you could see that in real time, you would see that there's what we've seen as a wide variety in the amount of detail that people provide there. So we have our DC Discography Committee team of Philip and myself and our students, and at this point we're QCing things, and our student Matt Rose here in the US just provided me with a lot of beefed up annotations that were very spare before. And so we're going to try and make sure that we've got a decent amount of information so that it will be useful for people when they look at an entry in the bibliography. They'll be able to say, oh, you know, that I've learned a little bit more about this. I don't think I want to consult that. So again, trying to grab the annotations. And this last also required field is availability digital version field, which we tried to add kind of lengthy explanation. Basically what we want is a link if you've got a digital version somewhere and you're able to capture that in the Google form. And so we see that, I don't know what percentage of the time, but I went through recently and tried to capture a lot of record catalogs that exist in amazing places. The British Library has a whole series of early record label catalogs. The Internet Archive has some. A resource called Hathi Trust, if you know that one, has a number of record catalogs. And then phonograph societies at different places have done that work. And so this is great. This is what we want, to be able to bring all this material together. So the link is important if it's available. But if not, we've got these other kinds of answers that you can provide, like available for purchase or not available out of print, or not yet complete, because we are hoping to grab and include work that's not yet published or even incomplete, if the discographer or researcher is willing to put that up as well. Not something that's typically been done. And so we're trying to sort of make that model a little bit, put that model a little bit more in the public view. And then we ask for contact information if you want to put that in case we have to follow up with any questions about the data. So that is basically what the Google form looks like. And we've tried, in using the form, we've tried to consult the original print volume when we can. There's a lot of discographies in my library's collection. Other people, Philip has done that some as well. But we're not going to, I think with this is something that may have changed a little bit in philosophy and an ability, because of this vast amount of information that's out here, for a team like ours to actually pull this off. So we're looking at we're eyeing the volume when we can, and we're using trusted library catalogs to back up that information if we don't have the volume in front of us. Or those have also come in handy for missing information that we found in entries, or when potentially there's some information that is wrong, we try to catch that and correct it as well too. And so that's basically our process as far as quality control and our research approach. And so far it's worked pretty good. I can see as the project grows, and it's starting to grow quite a bit recently, that we're going to have to have a very formal plan for how to get things QC'd and do our quality control for entries and filling out missing information, all of that. So I'm going to keep this web page open because I want to go back to the database. So I'll just search that again. Okay, so again, this is our project page. on the IASA website. And underneath that information where you can actually find the form to submit an entry are two other ways that you can help or participate with the bibliography. But at this point, I want to go ahead and show you a version of what the information looks like in the live database. As I said before, we had worked on this for over a year and a half before we had anything to show for it to the public, and so I'm very happy to say that we made this available, I think, February, March of this year, and we just sent emails out to the IASA list and the ARSC list and a lot of other related organizations letting everyone know that it's up and available now. So this is what the bibliography looks like live. And you'll see that we've got an initial page with just a bare bones description. We'll probably include that definition that we've been hammering out on this page along with a little bit of more information in the near future. But right now, we're just happy to have this up. And so you see that there are 4 columns that appear on the initial instance of the database. And each one of these is sortable. So you can click on the title column, and that title column is sortable alphabetically. You can do the same with author information. And you can do the same with the availability version or also with the publication date as well. But I want to show the DAHR. So this is what it looks like when you first come to the bibliography, and then you're able to click on the title link for any of those entries, and it opens a second page, which is the actual item page for that bibliography. And here you have a very good annotation for this great resource. And then you've got a series of fields that display underneath basically all that information that was in our spreadsheet and that came through the Google form is now displayed in our very first iteration of the bibliography. Again, we're going to be making improvements to this aesthetically, and we're constantly welcoming any kind of feedback that people have on the content or the shape design of the database. Again, this is really early on, but we're so very happy to have it up and available now. And so you've got the author and publisher publication information, but then you've got the link as well. And so that will take you straight to the Discography of American Historical Recordings, and then you can have at it with the amazing level of detail and data that they have in their resource. Again, these are databases on the web, and we are counting them as one entry in the bibliography. So they're huge resources in themselves, but just like an article, we are counting them as one entry, as you would probably expect in the bibliography. So I'm going to head back over to the PowerPoint now. And jump through these, which I've just shown you already. That is basically what appears on the title page. Wasn't sure I'd be able to show you the live link to the page, so I included some slides as well as a backup. Here's the example of that page and what I just showed you. And so that's the first way that anyone can help and participate with the project. The The second way is we've had a vision for the project ever since we started, that we would also like to be able to provide the full version of a discography and link to it from the bibliography, as I've alluded to earlier, in every case that we possibly can where the author has the right to do that. People have sent us their own PDFs that appear on the web. The organization GHT in Vienna that I mentioned before has scanned some volumes that are available as well. But we want to make it easy to do this part too. If an author has a discography that's short, it's an article, and wants it out there, wants it to be in the bibliography, then basically that scanned PDF version can be uploaded through a website that we are using now called WeTransfer. That's the second link that you see on the information page in the bibliography, on the bibliography page on the IASA website. And this is what their site looks like. It's really fun, and allows you to send a file up to 2 gigabytes. So it's not, you couldn't send something like that to us via email. So again, trying to make it easy. If someone has that material and it's already scanned, they have the rights to it, then we'll happily put it up. And the question was at that point, because it was early on, is like, where are we going to put these? You know, and so Philip came up with a server in the Czech Republic that we started with, and so that's why you see this particular address. It's a little fuzzy there, but we created this address as a place to dump those digital versions when we got them. But there's been some really great developments with the project since that point, which I'm just about to get to in a few minutes. But this is still up there if someone does have their own discography in whatever format that they have scanned and want to send to us. Great news is that we now have a place to put them. I'll get to that in just a minute. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was the second part of that vision was that it's not enough just to have a static document up there. We wanted to make them searchable so that you could actually do some research inside of those discographies. And so we started really lo-fi in the beginning. This is not the lo-fi version. This is actually an example of one of those volumes that I was talking about from GHT. They had scanned this 36 version of Delaunay, and it turned out pretty well. And so I scanned it with there's a lot of free software out there just to see what kind of results we would get that way. And they were really good. And then Philip grabbed his iPhone and started working with this early Odeon catalog. It's a Czech Odeon catalog from 1930. And so there's iPhone software, of course, for OCR work. And he just did some scans of these pages from this Odeon catalog. And these are the steps in the process. This was also from an earlier presentation. It's all we had at that point. And surprisingly, the results were really good with the iPhone. So we thought there's got to be something that bigger people are using in order to do this OCR work so that we could do it on a larger scale and make these searchable once we found a place to put them. We did, however, at that point, have Philip's book that I mentioned earlier when I was talking about his work, the ESTA discography, that he had sent in digital format, PDF, to the Internet Archive. And had posted it there. So they did the OCR work on that document, and that was up a year and a half ago already. You know, so we thought, we know we can do this, and we talked to several people, and we're thinking about the Internet Archive after our original discussion at the Bloomington conference, but hadn't yet really settled on a real possibility that way until very recently. We met with Brewster Kahle and Bob George in San Antonio at the ARS conference. They were actually there with a presentation of their own. If you haven't heard about this and you love 78s, he's got a mammoth project to digitize 200,000 78s, the kind of numbers that academic institutions really don't even dream about because of the cost. And he's making this happen. He's working with George Blood, who's doing all the transfers. There was an amazing presentation that they did with this turntable that George has constructed with 4 different tone arms. So you solve all the problems of people's questions about stylus, needles, and so that work is happening. And we started having conversations about 78s and how might this this kind of discography resource, when it includes scanned versions of the complete discographies, how might that be useful to their project as well, too? And, you know, the thought was, hey, could we ultimately link from the discographies to the sound files that they are creating at the rate of 500 full discs a day? They've done 10,000, 78 so far, working on the second batch of 10,000. And so there's lots of possibilities here for interfacing with the Internet Archive, which we were very excited about. And just last week, we were emailing with Internet Archive and got our own collection actually set up. And it's called the Digital Discography Collection. And it looks like this, and this is where those scanned versions are going to live now. And we have 2 right now. We have Phillips, and we have another one, a version of a DECA resource bibliography that's discography that's already on the Internet Archive. There are others on their site, but other people have posted them, so we're going to get busy now and build this collection up. And so another thing that Internet Archive can offer is a solution to any issues we might have with persistent linking to sites that we have captured inside of the bibliography. We can run our links through the Wayback Machine, which was created by the Internet Archive to archive basically the internet and millions and millions of web pages. But there's a way, like academic institutions make sure that they have persistent identifiers that don't ever die, that always are available for materials that they have linked in their collections. We can do this through the Internet Archive as well, too, to make sure that our links live on as well. So we've got a brief introduction, and you're going to see a lot more discographies in the next 6 months in this collection. So the other question now remains, how else might someone participate in the project and help us with this part? So we actually had a really good question. I think it was from Steve Smolian last year, or someone in RSCM Bloomington, like, okay, I've got all these great books and some of them are really unique. Will you guys take them and do the scanning, you know, when we're able to do that? And we said, yes, absolutely. So we set up this process by which people can send us even article-length discographies if you don't have the equipment or the inclination to do the scanning. We're going to be able to do that as well. And so we broke up the world, kind of. Philip gets all of Europe, and I get pretty much everything else. And so we've got this out there from a number of presentations, and we're hoping that that might actually be a way that we get materials that we can scan eventually to input in the discography collection. So that brings us to a big question that came up through our initial discussions with a lot of the pioneers in the field, really, pioneers in the field of discography, but then like Michael Gray and others who had worked on bibliographies before too. And our first, this was part of our reaching out to a lot of different people and trying to bring people together and find out what people were interested in. And, a lot of discographers, researchers have put, years and years of their lives into doing this kind of research. And the really sad thing is that while the potential of publishing has been there, since Gray and Gibson's book of bibliographies came out, all through that time, these publishers, Greenwood, Scarecrow, if you know the discographies, you know those names. Oxford is involved, McFarland. Mainspring has been doing a great job in addition to their website, but they just announced, as I mentioned earlier, that they're not going to be publishing in print anymore. So we thought, hey, we want to acknowledge that this is a lot of work and that this is still important to those folks who have done the research. And, we have this resource and we're asking for material that people are willing to share, but we also acknowledge that work and want to respect that that's work that people have done over a course of time like that. So we asked the question. But I wanted to at least highlight this point. The argument for having electronic versions of discographies is pretty clear, because you look at that Brian Russ book that I passed around and all the little pages pasted in and all the corrections written in, and that's what happens. People get things wrong, or they discover a new master somewhere or a new recording, or there are gaps in someone's very significant work. So it's always constantly changing. And so there's no real argument about electronic being the way to go for publishing discographies. But in an effort to at least think about the possibility, we asked the question, talked to some people about it, and talked at a meeting at ARSC in San Antonio just recently, a couple of weeks ago, about this idea that we had as part of the committee, which was potentially to have an open competition for IASA members and use grant money to actually get and have judges, as part of the pioneers and the members of the field, have kind of a panel and make a selection one year and see that it gets published, and we floated that idea to a number of people, and kind of a basic outline of what we'd be looking for when we'd be ready to actually put that idea out there. And, it seemed like a pretty good idea, and, one that had some predecessors before, I think, as well. But that idea was on hold for a little while, and we got a chance to revisit it again at ARSC, and I'll come to that in just a minute about some of the feedback that we got from folks there. But I wanted to acknowledge the people who have been so important to the project thus far. This is our team of pioneer advisors, Michael Gray and Klaus-Peter Gallen-Miller, and Suresh, who I mentioned before, from Society of Indian Record Collectors. And also the great work of our students. We have a new student in the Czech Republic. Michael has finished his period of work for us now, but Matthew Rose is still here in the US. I don't know if anyone knows him, but he's an amazing young collector in himself and very involved in ARSC as well. And so this is the project team that we've had for about a year. And, we get support from IASA for our conferences and for the work that we're doing on the bibliography, but it's still a pretty spare team. And so we really, really do completely rely on the wonderful help that we're getting from people out in the world who are filling out the Google Forms and letting us know about discographies that we had no idea existed, so at least we can do the work of capturing them. And we've started looking at a project plan for the next couple of years, and we'll be talking about that probably at the next IASA meeting. But as it grows, we're going to need more help, and more people working on it, and in a more focused sort of way. So we're looking to that as part of our growth and our project plan for the future. All that said, we were very, very happy to have a presence at the ARSC meeting in San Antonio a couple of weeks ago. I did a presentation last year which basically introduced the bibliography to the ARSC community, anyone who was in attendance there or heard the recording afterwards. But we had a lot of stuff to report, a lot of new developments, and since the meeting we've had some new developments that I've just talked about here. So we floated the idea with Michael and with the ARSC board to actually have a joint meeting of the two discography committees, which we thought would be fantastic, because we could pool all the people who are interested in this work across the organizations and reach even more people and get even more feedback. And so we had that meeting on Friday, May 12th in the evening. If you know the ARSC meetings, it was just before the Collectors Roundtable, which lasts for 2 hours with Kurt Knock. And we thought, what better time to have our meeting situated? And they were close by in proximity as well, too. So we had our hour to basically show the database like I've just shown you here, and ask for a lot of feedback, and kind of give an update of where we were. We had the database. We were really thinking about the Internet Archive at that point too. So we had a really good discussion, a very lively discussion, and about 18 attendees at a joint meeting that has never existed before. So we felt pretty good about that. And there were several folks at ARSC who were very helpful in getting the word out. It was in the program book, but still and yet, people are busy at conferences. And so I was incredibly pleased with the turnout. And again, a very lively discussion. We went back and we looked at our definition again. And so some of the comments that we got were to expand, refine our definition of discography, and that's really important, which we knew, but we were balancing looking at definitions and looking at this mass of new material that we wanted to just start capturing. And so we kind of were loose about it and allowed ourselves to grow and take in the feedback. And so now you see tonight there's a new iteration of the definition that I feel like is a pretty good one. And so we're going to go with that for now. I haven't shared that to the folks who brought that up at the meeting, but I'll be doing that soon. Another question that they had, and something that had been included within the print volumes of the earlier bibliographies, was they had an evaluation component, which at that time was incredibly useful, and which you would see in other reference type works like that. Where a librarian would evaluate the resource and tell you, would give you some clues as to how this might be valuable or whether or not it might be valuable to you. And we looked at that. I looked at those volumes, and we just put that idea aside in the beginning. But you have a question? Yeah. Yeah. It's fine to ask it now. Sure. Yeah. Oh, better to wait? Okay, great.
One of the problems with the published versions in the book form were that the evaluations, which were a letter code, didn't actually tell you the quality. All they told you was certain items that were or weren't included. And so for a researcher, let's say, trying to find out about a particular artist, if you had 5 different discographies listed for that artist, you wouldn't necessarily know whether any of them were any good or how detailed and whatever they are. So I understand you said you'd put it aside. With the immense volume that could now exist, it could take you forever. You could have 100 discographies and not know that this particular one is just a listing done by some kid who happens to have a few records, and this one is a scholarly discography that includes everything from matrix numbers to recording location to playback speeds to whatever. So at least from my point of view, I think that would be incredibly important if it could be done. The second thing I was thinking is that, and maybe you'll get to this, with Excel and other type discographies, this is less important, but still it might be valuable to say what format it is in, i.e., is this listed by date of recording, or is this listed by, if it's a record label one, by artist, or is it listed by, is the index basically the main part of the discography? That sort of information, I think, would also be of value. I've done many discographies, and it'd be helpful to know what I was looking at before I looked at it.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, I remember that about the letter codes now that you say it, about the Gray and Gibson. And so basically what he was just saying is that they had a letter code and a number of items that they were checking for to make sure they existed inside of that discography. And so I wasn't able to follow that so clearly in every case, but your point about the format info I think is absolutely spot on, and I'm just made a note of that now, and we'll try to figure out a way to at least say something about the types of fields that show up in a discography. We'll start working on that, and so thank you. So the other feedback that we got strongly was about the record catalogs as well, and so we had our examples, and we had a lot of them that were in scanned versions, and everyone agreed that they were very useful in research, but really felt like they were a different entity. So we've got the question now of whether they're going to be separated out in kind of a separate sub-collection, or whether we'll figure out a way to have them side by side like that, but separate. And I already mentioned this last part about the persistent links that we're going to run through the Internet Archive Wayback Machine to make sure that they always stay alive. And then, amazingly, most of all, they said no more books. You know, it was like resounding. You know, why bother now? And, you know, we're taking that in, and we're still thinking about our idea of the discography series, but it was interesting to note just how almost unanimous that was, that people were not, that said don't bother with the books because of the corrections and the additions and all of that. So that's still an open question. You know, welcome any feedback from anyone here tonight about that during the question and answer period as well, too. But that's what we heard from that joint meeting. And maybe this will be the kind of joint meeting that we'll be able to have in the future at ARSC meetings. That's what we're hoping as well, too, and maybe collaborate even more on this project and others. So lastly, I would just say, if you feel like participating, contact me or Philip, become a contributor to any part of the process that I've outlined before, or you can come to IASA in Berlin in September of this year. We have a number of things coming up as part of the program that we are involved with. And so I want to just highlight a few of those as well. IASA was held in Washington, D.C. Last year, and we had our first workshop, which I think was alluded to in the introduction. And it was basically, this actually is now a longer version of that because we had even more time here tonight, which I'm grateful for. But it's a workshop that takes you through all parts of the process and answers any questions for people who want to contribute. It was actually a good opportunity at that point in time to get some initial feedback about the Google form and about the language issue in particular is where that's where we got the feedback about let's just do it in English. And that and that we had some inconsistencies about the record catalogs, and so we fixed all that stuff. And basically, we're Philip, excuse me, Philip was very, very busy last summer, as I mentioned, going to conferences in Europe, and we had gone to ARSC in Bloomington, and I can't even remember. I think he was at BAAC, a Baltic Audiovisual Conference as well last year. And we're really just trying to, now we've got something tangible to show for our work, and we've got a lot of support, but we're still trying to build the network as well too, because we think that's important in a lot of ways, just in the ways that academic institutions and collectors interact and work together in a wide variety of ways. So that's part of our workshop presentation as well. And we've got a new member of the Discography Committee for IASA, Thomas Henry in Paris. You might know his website, Sense to Bakelite, is an amazing site dedicated to old record stores in Paris, Disquaires de Paris. And he's doing a lot of fantastic work on the web and became vice president of the IASA Discography Committee last year. And so I am showing the title of his presentation coming up at the Discography meeting because it dovetails with a question that we've had just in our conversations together in the last 6 months. He's working with the Musée de l'Homme and their sound archive collection, working on a discography there as well. But in particular, we've been talking about record catalogs because I mentioned the British Library has a collection of those amazing early gramophone company catalogs available that you can download or open. I'm not sure if you can download them, but you can see the full version in PDF. But the question remains about copyright in record catalogs. And so we started to talk about that, and some of the institutions aren't ready to sign off on that, but places like Musée de l'Homme and obviously the British Library would have many, many more. We actually have a great early Odeon catalog of Arab 78s as well too. That's an amazing catalog, and I haven't seen another copy anywhere else. So I would like to scan that one as well and make that available too. But so Thomas, we at IASA structured a little bit differently from ARSC in that a lot of the committee meetings happen in the very beginning of the conference, the first day, and so we've got our committee meeting on Sunday, and anyone is invited to that Discography Committee meeting who happens to be attending the conference in Berlin. The way it's structured is we generally have a couple of papers, shorter papers that are presented on the subject of discography and records, and so it's great to have Thomas doing this for us this year on a subject that we really want to put out there and get some discussion about, particularly with the academic institutions, so that we can figure out a way to make these available in digital form. Because who's going to find, who's going to come to Harvard to see a early Odeon Arabic 78 catalog? And so it's very important to get this information out there, and we're happy to have him doing this particular presentation as part of our meeting. And we've actually got George Blood coming to talk about his process at the IASA meeting as well too. That's on the program now. So here's a little description of what they've been working on. I think I kind of highlighted a bit of that earlier. And so they're looking for metadata, and we're looking to have discographies digitized. So eventually maybe there's a way that those two things can interface. And he actually is also, as you can see there, he just does it. He has an idea like this, and he just does it. And if anyone was actually at that ARSC conference and saw George Blood's presentation, he's a pretty good guy to have working on the transfers as well too. So that's going to happen at the meeting as well. And lastly, I wanted to tell you about an email list that we have created for the work of the committee. And it's also on that project page, and you can find it and sign up for the list. You have to go through this process basically where you send an email to the IASA webmaster, but it's all simply laid out on that page. And so we have this project that was just kind of a pipe dream idea in Paris in 2015, and we kept working on it and got feedback and had some setbacks, in the beginning. And honestly, I have to say, we were thinking in the beginning, as if this project is not big enough, we were thinking, how can we turn this into the world's biggest database of discographic data about records? We can't do that. We can't do that with this project. And we looked at that question, and we know you start talking about it, and everyone starts going, do it. That's what we want. And you've got DAHR and things like that, and user-generated sites like Discogs that I mentioned before, people doing the work, but are those resources going to eventually ever be able to talk to one another or interface with one another in a successful, meaningful way? Is there ever going to be one big database? I don't know, maybe there will be, but we decided, after acknowledging all the initial work that had been done, we decided, what we really need more than anything is just a really good survey of what's out there. And I can remember someone at the ARSC question and answer period last year who told me about some Russian journals that were held at an academic institution from the early 20th century that had lots and lots of discographic data that I had never heard of and I don't think has ever been captured anywhere. And so, survey, that's what we decided. We want to make it useful and great in its breadth, but we had to stop there, and we just are leaving the idea of a larger database, which may result from future projects or collaborations at some point. But right now we're really, really focused on this, and that's where we're putting our energies, and we think it's going to, it's going to be valuable, and we've got a lot of good feedback already. And so I would just say that, given all the great work that's been done in the field of discography and, all the work that was done on trying to capture all the discographies and bibliographies, we just want to kind of honor that work and take up the mantle, and hope that we can carry this work forward in a really meaningful way. And so I would say thank you very much in English, and Philip would say děkuji in Czech. So thank you. And ready for any questions that people might have as well, too. I think he's bringing the mic down, Gary.
I've got a few of them. You mentioned that it's only going to include commercial recordings.
Yes.
How do you feel regarding the unofficial commercial recordings? The pirate material like Eddie Smith and some of the others which are borderline commercial like Mito.
I would include those as well, the pirate material as well. Yeah, I haven't spoken to the group about that, but I feel like we would agree probably to include that kind of material.
Yeah, so in effect, if it's on disc,
yes,
or sold commercially rather than just traded,
right,
it would be included.
Absolutely. In fact, I have an example of a really early pirate disc in that Arabic 78 collection that I have. And, you know, as we all know, pirate recordings go back a long, long way. This was one that was in New York in the 20s and 30s. And so I tried to capture information about the history of that recording, and I think it's very important in the overall landscape. And so that's what makes me think that I would include that kind of material in the bibliography too.
And in terms of catalogs, in addition to the commercial record manufacturers' catalogs, I assume you also include, obviously, the national ones like Schwann, Bielefelder, and so on.
Yeah, those, I had those, I don't know if you saw that slide, but I had catalogs of that sort listed in the original collection. I'm actually want to have a discussion about that and would welcome any feedback. I'm not as sure about those, but I thought of the Schwann and Bielefelder too as well, and not as sure about those. Yeah.
Because they do represent a discography of sorts, although it's limited in terms of geography and time. It's usually things that are only available within the border of, in the case of Bielefelder, Germany, or the French ones within France. And the minute something is available only in Austria, it's not included in the Bielefelder.
Right.
It's that sort of
and
thing.
the sort of time nature of those resources was part of our discussion, I think, about maybe not including them as well too. But they are a snapshot, you know, and some of them are really full of a lot of detail, like that. And I remember working with the Schwann catalog a lot over the years. And
what about release bulletins, the monthly sort of thing that you get either from the major companies
it's
or
something that
importers?
you would see too, Gary, a lot as well. But my gut feeling on those would be no too as well. Although you can make the argument, this is the way it goes, how to limit the definition and where to stop. Because, you know, I mean, nowadays, if you're looking at a new release bulletin for Who's Left for Naxos now, then, you know, you could argue that it would be nice to know what came out, or if something, you might be able to use those in a way that, you know, like if something didn't come out, you could find out some information about a release that, you know, they never followed through on. I'm not sure how useful that would be to people doing record research. Again, I put that out there to anyone who has any thoughts on those new release catalogs as well too. My gut feeling on those and the Schwann type of buyers catalogs is probably no, but we're going to be thinking about that a little bit more as we shut the gate on the definition, I guess, and on the parameters of what to include and what not to include. Thank you.
A couple of thoughts about what Gary was saying. Some new release, at least historically old new release catalogs, sometimes listed things that didn't make it to their main catalogs. So you will find that there's something listed in a new release, and it's the only time that the record company ever even mentioned that record. Yeah. So that's just one thought. Another thing is you're going to run into a problem if you have a hard and fast rule about let's call them unpublished recordings, because you'll have some discographers that will include them in their main body. In other words, they'll have the commercial releases, but they'll also list the non-commercial releases. So you probably want to have, again, if you're getting some sort of coding system, some indication that those discographies also include unpublished, even if you're not doing just strictly unpublished ones. But secondly, you have some who made life better for some, but not necessarily for you, where they publish their discography in two parts. And the first part is commercial released recordings, and the second is unpublished recordings. If you only include the first, you're basically going to say it's as if he didn't do the second. So I wouldn't be hard and fast about not including unpublished recordings. I think my recommendation would be to shy away from them as a primary, but not shy away from them as inclusive.
Okay. That's helpful. Thank
And
you.
even there, if somebody does a discography that strictly focuses on unpublished, but it's scholarly work, you could argue that that should be listed somewhere, because that, of course, would be useful to researchers. I mean, you're running into a problem you're familiar with, which is that this could expand forever, and that you're going to have some parameters, or you'll never be able to finish it. But I do think those are parameters that should be included.
Great, thank you. When you were talking about unpublished recordings, were you thinking of the kind of examples that Gary was talking about?
No, I actually was not. I'm thinking of things that have never been published in any form but are known to exist.
Okay.
Let me give you an example.
Not like unpublished archival field recordings or that kind of thing?
Let me give you an example. There was a discography that was actually in the Ars Journal about 25 years ago by a gentleman named Ned Young. He did one on the conductor Serge Koussevitzky. And the first half was Koussevitzky's commercial records and everything that was ever released on it. But the second one was all the known live recordings that existed, and he actually very carefully separated them into two different publications. One was in one journal, and then the unpublished material was in a second journal. But there are many, there's a fine discography of Bruno Walter, for example, that lists both kinds in the body and doesn't separate them out. They just organize it strictly by composer. You need to make a decision as to whether you're going to include the first example that I gave or include the second, or neither. But if you're not, you're going to be throwing out some baby with your bathwater. And if you are, you need to find a way to so indicate.
Yeah, and be explicit about it.
Yeah, that would be my suggestion.
Yeah, thanks again. Yeah.
I think I can speak loudly enough. Just a simple. Oh, I won't deny posterity. I wonder about the 16-inch transcriptions that were made available to radio stations by subscription, like Associated World Capital Transcription Service. I don't think we would call those commercial recordings, although sometimes commercial things also appeared on World and other labels. What is the policy about that rather important and fascinating material?
It's very, very important, and you notice it wasn't on the list, but it's one that I think about a lot, because I know there's a lot of work done in that area, and so, yeah, and some great discographies too. So my feeling is we would want to capture that material, and I like the idea of focus, you know, like instead of drawing a hard and fast line like that, saying we're focusing on, you know, published recordings, but we might include these as well, because you don't want to leave out that kind of great work, and also work that people are really interested in. So I think the transcription disc would be included.
I had a question related to what you call discographic data. Do the elements in that data include specifically musical elements as opposed to bibliographical or metadata type?
No, just
nothing related to the music.
Nothing related to the music, just bibliographic
Just
metadata,
bibliographic.
as you would see, like in a library record. You're welcome. Okay, are we good?
Any other questions or comments?
One quick question. You were talking about the transfer project of 78s.
Yes.
What is done about works that take up more than one side? Are there side mends, or is it just each side unique by itself?
That's their project. I think it's just one side that way as a unique file. Yep.
Just for the record, pardon the pun, it should be one side, because, for example, if you have two different takes of the same side, if you join them together, you can't do that. Plus, when you join sides together, you lose music because there are overlaps.
Yeah.
And there might be something unique on one side that isn't on another. And if you want to indicate bar of score, for example, if it's a classical piece, you can't do that if you don't know where the side starts and the side and the side ends. So, discographically speaking, it would have to be independent. Or you could do both, which is another option.
Yeah, this question has come up in library cataloging of 78s and had a lot of different approaches to that question, but yeah, one side. Great, well, thanks again to everyone for coming tonight, and feel free to send any questions via email or talk to me after tonight too as well.